I'm James Faulk. This is Neon Galactic. We are a podcast that's a production of KEET-TV, a PBS affiliate in Northern California. So you're an associate professor there, and your focus is on dark matter, if that's correct. Could you tell us a little bit about what your work is currently, and where the field overall where that stands?
So you mean for my day job on dark matter and mainstream, or
Yeah.
UAP, or
Yeah.
both?
I want to
Okay,
start with what you're doing in your main job in terms of dark matter, and then we'll sort of pivot into how that's related to UAP or how you ended up evolving into the topic of
sure,
UAP.
sure, absolutely. So I look for dark matter, which is a hypothetical form of matter that has very strong indirect and observational evidence for it from astronomy and cosmology. So we know there's extra math out there because of its gravitational effect, but we don't know what it is. What is it made out of? So
Mhm.
even though that sounds like it's related to outer space, but actually I'm a particle physicist. So I would say astroparticle physicist, but what I do is much more particle than it is astro. I work on building particle physics experiments. I work on building particle detectors with the goal of identifying dark matter. What type of particle is it, if that's what it is?
Yeah. Now, a lot of times that would involve like accelerators and stuff. Do you work with that kind of thing, or is that
No, no,
no?
not an accelerator physicist. No. So although there are people who do accelerator physics who look for dark matter by trying to produce it in
Hmm.
accelerators, that's not at all what I do, because for in my field of research, nature herself is the natural accelerators producing, producing the particles we're trying to detect.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things that I've caught in the ether or whatever is that we don't really know what dark matter is. There are some theories. Some people have thought neutrinos might be dark matter, and there's also like weakly interacting massive particles, I think is the term. Have we
Yeah.
gotten any closer to actually being able to precisely define what we think it is, or is that still, a mystery?
No, we have a great mystery. We have no idea what dark matter is. There are theories that span from very small to very large masses. So WIMPs, or weakly interacting mass particles, are often quoted as like the standard paradigm, but
Hmm.
it doesn't. That phrase is kind of losing more and more of its meaning because we have so many competing models. There's WIMPs, there's axions, there's cue balls, there's all kinds of stuff, and we don't know if any, which, if any, are correct. Could also be a combination, right? Dark matter. There's no reason why dark matter couldn't be interesting, like ordinary matter, and be made up of multiple particles.
Yeah.
So no, there really is no theoretical consensus, nor is there a direction from the theoretical physics community that says, it's at this mass and cross section. Look here with this type of technology.
Now, so from what you're just saying, does that mean that it could be complex matter? Could there be structures within that we can't even begin to sense because it's I don't know, outside the realm of what we're, picking up?
Yeah, it's possible, but again, that's not the default paradigm is that dark matter does not have a lot of its own interactions. But who knows? There's a theory called self-interacting dark matter. There could be some self-interactions. As far as we know, though, the evidence really is that dark matter interacts gravitationally. We know
Mhm.
it doesn't interact with the electromagnetic or nuclear forces because that would change the large scale structure of the universe. So that would go against the evidence we have from cosmology. That's not to say that dark matter doesn't have its own forces that
Mhm.
apply only within the dark sector. There are theories and models that suggest that.
Yeah. As a personal question, why did you choose dark matter as your topic of emphasis?
That's a really funny question because it's really an accident
Okay.
of history. It's just so happens because when I was starting graduate school, starting my PhD, that the professor who worked on dark matter was the one who was hiring. I mean,
Ah.
there's no deep philosophical reason. I was a physics graduate student. I always knew I wanted to do science and specifically physics, but why I'm in a particular field is really an accident of history or fate or what have you. So I don't have some great story for you of how like dark matter is more compelling than some other, all different parts of physics and all different parts of science, of course, all have different arguments of how they're important and compelling.
Sure.
So I don't have like a story of how it was so compelling that I wanted to identify this unidentified material that makes up a substantial fraction of the universe. It
Yeah.
really was an accident of history. But now, of course, now having done it for so many decades, now I'm gun ho.
Now, so I mean, what percentage does it make up? What's the current count in terms of what over the of the overall matter in the universe? How much of it is accounted for as dark matter? Do you have any sense of that?
The percentages? Oh
Yeah.
yes. Oh yes, absolutely. So we have what's called the standard cosmological model,
Hmm.
and so we think our best current thinking is that the universe is 69% dark energy. We have no clue what that is. That's not my field of study. That's
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
astronomy. No idea what that is.
I
It's not
get that.
related to dark matter. Then 25% dark matter and about 5% ordinary matter. Actually, no, I made a mistake. No, actually, that was correct. I said 69, but I should have rounded to 70. 70%, about 70% dark energy, 25% dark matter, 5% ordinary matter. So that 25% is what concerns me, and my work is figuring out what that piece is.
Yeah. It seems like, I mean, in terms of an ontological view, that's a big percentage for it to be something that we totally
Oh,
can't explain.
absolutely. And it's even worse that from an ontological point of view, from what I just said, you might think we understand 5% of the universe. Oh
Yeah.
no, it's much worse than that.
Yeah.
Because of that 5%, 3/4 is hydrogen and 1/4 is helium.
Wow.
That adds up to 100%.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that everything that makes up you and me, not important as far as the cosmos is concerned.
Yeah.
We are the dregs of the universe. So oxygen, carbon, all these and complex molecules of life, they're too small to even show up on the pie chart of the universe. They're not even 1/10%. And
Wow.
and and so so that 5% is mostly just hydrogen and helium gas. So what we really understand of the universe, sure, we do understand hydrogen and helium very well, but what you and I think of as ordinary matter is not hydrogen and helium, right? It's oxygen, carbon, it's the silicon in our computers, the plastics, things like that. That's all a laughably small percentage of the universe, as far as we can tell. And we still haven't discovered everything. What if it's an even smaller percentage because the pie chart isn't done, because there's
Yeah.
more to discover out there?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, you mentioned dark energy, and I understand that there's a difference between dark energy and dark matter. There are some theories that dark energy doesn't really exist, that it might be a relic of different calculations and stuff, but that's not
Yes.
the case with dark matter. There are proofs, although not direct. Is that correct in terms of being able to spot dark matter?
No, that's not entirely correct, because
Okay.
the same modified theories of gravity that attempt to explain away dark energy try to do the same thing for dark matter very often as well. And I
Okay.
know some theoretical physicists doing this, so that's not entirely correct. However, one thing you did say that is correct is there, I would say, of course, I'm biased since I work on dark matter, not dark energy. There are more, there's a richer amount of evidence for dark matter from multiple independent perspectives. I think more so than dark energy. But one could make the case they're approximately equal. But I think with dark matter, I can point to 7 or 8 sort of almost independent pieces of evidence that all point to dark matter being stuff that you can
Yeah.
have more of less of. I'm definitely less familiar with dark energy, but from my understanding, and having worked and working with dark matter, there's definitely more, I would say, more evidence, but part of that is historical, because
Hmm.
dark energy was only discovered, if you can call it that, because we don't know what it is, in the late 1990s, early
Yeah.
2000s. But
Yeah.
with dark matter, we've been thinking about it for nearly 100 years, or maybe more than 100 years. We've seen, astronomers have seen some indirect, evidence, as you called it.
Yeah. So before we get into the UAP stuff, where would you say that I mean, we have the standard model of physics, and I know that that stretches from, the theory of relativity down to the quantum level. And there's a lot of, equations. Some of them are elegant and beautiful that try to explain that. But given that there's such a large chunk of the universe that we don't really fully understand, do you think that we're as close as we think we are to a fundamental understanding of what's going on in the universe?
No, I think we need to learn from history.
Yeah.
And I think that we're always further away than we think, because in the 1890s, we thought all of physics was done.
Yeah.
We're just going to tie up a couple loose ends. And then in some circles, this happened again in the 1990s. We'll find the top quark and the Higgs boson, just wrap some things up, and, we'll be fine. Oh, there's dark matter, but we'll figure that out soon, and it'll be fine. And then, whoa, and then dark energy comes and blows up the whole picture, and we still haven't found dark matter. So I think that we are, do I think do I don't think it's hopeless. I do have a very optimistic view of science, where
Mhm.
we always are gaining more knowledge. And in my opinion, even though there's a massive amount of knowledge out there, I wouldn't call it infinite. I do think that there is that there probably is some sort of absolute truth or theory of everything or something like that. And I do think that we are closer now than we were 10 years ago, than 100 years ago. However, I think we are nowhere near as close as many people think, where, oh, we'll just tie up some loose ends. No, I think that we are probably still centuries, if not millennia or more away. So I think that we give ourselves too much credit sometimes for what we understand. So I'm sort of a realist in that sense. Not really, I said I was optimistic, but I'm also I'm not pessimistic that there's an infinite number of knowledge and we're making no progress. I don't think that's true, because if that was true, we wouldn't have computers and satellites and telescopes, right? So I do think that there is forward progress, but I think it's nowhere near as rapid or complete as some people will think in terms of understanding fundamental physics.
Now that's interesting, because I know that you have a relatively open mind about UAP, and that's sort of where I was going with that. There's a lot of people who are in your field and virtually every hard science field who are like, the ideas that people put forth about how the transportation might work, or faster than light travel, or all these other things, and they say, well, that's not possible because we're looking at our standard model and there's nowhere in this scheme for that kind of thing to fit, so therefore it's not happening. And that seems like a logical error. Does that play into why you've decided to have an open mind about this subject?
It's even worse than that. You don't even need new physics, just new engineering. So we have to go back and I have to correct things.
Yeah, please. No, that's the problem.
Faster than light travel. There are tons of publications that say it's possible in peer-reviewed scientific journals just in the past 3 years, and going back even to the 1990s. So that's number one. Number two, you don't need faster than light travel to explore the universe. Very common misconception. If you could just go a little bit below the speed of light, the universe is your oyster because of time dilation. So everybody you know on Earth will be dead for millions of years, but only a few years will pass by for you. So everyone forgets time dilation, and they forget it in science fiction and in all fiction in general. So basically, it's a twofold thing. Not only do you not necessarily need new physics for faster than light travel, step two, you don't even need faster than light travel to explore the universe. Massive misconception. You can do it less than speed of light and explore the entire universe. You need a fuel source, you need shielding. So there are issues that need to be solved that make it difficult. But those are questions of engineering.
Yeah.
And engineers are clever, right? We used to think air travel was impossible. Space travel was impossible, even to low Earth orbit like Sputnik. And yet all the naysayers were proven wrong again and again and again. Yeah. And so part of the reason why I'm open-minded too, we have to differentiate also. It sounds like we're jumping right away to alien spacecraft, because remember, UFO, UAP, all that means it's unidentified. It could be a bird, a plane, could be an atmospheric phenomenon you haven't seen before. And it seems like we're already here making the conceptual leap to non-human spacecraft, which I grant is a valid hypothesis, but most definitely not the only one, and certainly one of the most speculative.
Yeah. What's fascinating about this whole subject is that I think a lot of people are right there with what you're saying, but there's been such an effort by certain vested interests to add stigma to the conversation, and so some people actually believe that way. But I think a lot of people are just trying to get it investigated so they can figure out what's actually happening. And I think the stigma was manufactured in a way to kind of, for whatever reason, and which makes me even more interested in what's actually going on, to throw people off the scent. But I mean, I don't want to be paranoid necessarily. But if you could talk a little bit about, go ahead.
Not the first time there's been a stigma on something. People used to laugh about meteors and meteorites.
That's right.
Rocks don't fall from the sky. That's stupid. Only morons believe that. Only uneducated fools believe rocks don't fall from the sky. So if it turns out there's something real, doesn't matter if it's alien or not, if it's something real and important and interesting, UAP, it would most definitely not be the first time in human history or even in modern scientific history that something turned out to be correct that people used to laugh at. A virus causes ulcers. Oh, that's not true. A Nobel Prize for that, for H. pylori. You see this again and again in human history in general, and in specifically in more recent centuries in scientific history, is that what used to be laughed at, germs, atoms, right? Atoms, tiny little things we can't see, make up everything. All these things used to be laughed at by serious philosophers, natural philosophers, later scientists. And they turn out to be real. Now, of course, one can counter that with 10 times more things that turn out to be laughed at and turn out not to be real. Sure. But we have to remember that sometimes there are those diamonds in the rough where there are things that don't have maybe convincing evidence. And then it turns out, wait, all those people we used to label as crackpots, they've been right all along. And this has happened repeatedly in the history of science.
Well, that's an interesting point and something I hadn't really considered. So would you say that this topic is more victimized by that kind of, like, I mean, what people call scientism, where it's like people have a dogma that they follow? Do you think this subject is any more subject to that, or are people just more sensitive because they're so passionate about what they believe?
I think it is subject to scientific dogmatism because and it's, to me, I find it very infuriating because it's not even going against any dogma. For example, for extraterrestrial civilization to exist, absolutely no problem. And the hanging point is, though, the sticking point is then people say, oh, but they can't get here. But what's remarkable is that it only requires engineering, clever engineering, for interstellar travel. We might not even need new physics. So again, like I said earlier, common misconception, we need new physics to cross interstellar space. Now, new physics would definitely help, might make things easier, fuel source, shielding against radiation, things like that. But my point is that we can already imagine within the current paradigm. So a lot of the stigma is sort of, I think, is manufactured, not necessarily from scientific dogmatism that's used to sort of disguise it, but I think we're afraid. We're afraid deep down that humans aren't top dog. And what's really interesting is that used to be religious thinking. Scientists used to say that they were going against the religious thinking that humans are the pinnacle of creation. And yet now it is scientists propping that up, saying, there are no, advanced aliens that could reach here. And so now the tables have turned, and now you have scientists doing the same thing that it used to be done by, the whatever, at least in Western Europe, by like, or in the Western civilization, by, the archbishops and stuff, that, that humans are the pinnacle. And yet, but now we have scientists who won't even admit they're doing that, but I think have a subconscious bias against any evidence or potential evidence or even hints that there could be non-human intelligence, because we're afraid. We don't want to lose our top dog status mentally.
Yeah. Have you, I mean, first off, well, let's pivot to what kind of work you're doing in the UAP sphere, and what some of the exciting things that you consider.
Absolutely. So I'm part of a couple different UAP organizations. There's UAPx, and then there's SCU. So let me talk a little bit about UAPx. So, I'm a professor at UAlbany, but I consult externally on this topic and try to, dabble in this, although there's no funding. This is not my day job, as we said earlier, but I work at this organization, UAPx, which is a 501c3 federal nonprofit, and the goal is complementary to other UFO organizations. The goal is to really go out and get new evidence and hard evidence where we know the provenance of it. So it's nice to go back to historical cases where you may have radar showing high velocities that don't make sense, things like that. However, those can always be poo-pooed by a determinant of skeptics. So what we want to do is try to do a multi-sensor, multimodal approach where we collect our own data, not just from one camera, multiple cameras, not just cameras, but multiple different types of sensors. And this also idea is catching on. There are also other organizations that have started doing this the past couple of years. And we really think that this is a really important complementary approach to the countless existing UFO organizations that look at historical cases, historical data, interview witnesses, and things like that. We want to have a different approach where we take our own data and try to go to, alleged UFO hotspots and get new data, get our own data. That's really the philosophy behind the people I work with on UAPx, including, so my colleagues here at UAlbany, Professor Kevin Knuth and Professor Cecilia Levy are working with me on this. That's really our philosophy.
Okay. Now, I mean, that would function to sort of take this out of the government's lap, right? In terms of disclosure. I mean, if you guys got information where you're absolutely affirming that these things are happening, it has to be dealt with, right? I mean,
exactly. So our goal here is we want to be proactive and get our own unclassified data. That way, the government doesn't have a stranglehold on the juiciest, evidence or cases. That's also, one of our primary motivations, because right now, I mean, everything is still in the hands of the Defense Department. You've got the AARO organization. I know NASA's stepping up now, and they're promising to be transparent. but they've said that they're still going to let Arrow lead the way, and that's, Arrow's in the Pentagon. And so the thing is, it's really hard to be able to get good unclassified data, because the government doesn't want to release data that will allow our adversaries or potential adversaries to know what kind of radar and sensing technology we have.
Yeah. And I mean, that's understandable. I get that part of it. So now, you are among a group of academics at your university that are doing this research. Do you still find that you get a negative reaction from other folks, or is it pretty much, people don't attack you for that research?
Oh, there's definitely still negative reaction. It's not as bad as I had originally, I guess, imagined, you could say, or expected.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely exists and is real.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there are, again, it's not the majority. It's not official. It's not like my chair is very supportive. The administration's fairly supportive. So it's not as bad as I had imagined. But as the old saying goes, your mileage may vary. So depending on which university one is at, one may experience more taboo or stigma. It depends on your institution, depends what your colleagues are like around you. And I've been lucky where it's pretty low stigma where I am at the University of Albany.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know colleagues who have, especially going back in time, who have definitely had to suffer immense persecution. They're told, why are you looking into this? It's pseudoscientific, and it can be incredibly frustrating.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things I was hoping to ask you about, did you watch the hearing with David Grush?
Absolutely.
The congressional hearing, of course. Yeah. You heard his explanation of things, and he was talking about interdimensional hypothesis. And I was wondering, since you are a scholar, if you could break that down for me and my viewers about how plausible that was, or did that sound like, gobbledygook from a real scientist? I mean, he is a real scientist. I don't mean to say that, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. So, Grush is not a scientist, but he claimed.
Well, physics major. I don't know if that what qualifies.
No,
I guess
that doesn't count. He doesn't have
okay.
But I definitely, let's take one step back, because
sure.
I need to address Grush's testimony.
Please.
Because it's remarkable to me, because he claims, to boil it down, I know this is an oversimplification, but right now we're down to perjury or aliens.
Yeah.
And of course the skeptical say, well, obviously perjury, humans lie all the time. But it's remarkable to me that someone like this, who has, what does he have to gain? Does he have a book deal or something? I mean, to perjure yourself in front of Congress, is this is a big deal. I know Bill Clinton and all this, people can trot out examples of perjury in front of Congress, but if you look at the history of the whistleblower protections, this is a specific type of thing. We have not had people who call themselves who are like going under the protection of Whistleblower Acts, making stuff up. That's not actually happened historically in front of Congress. Someone could say it's the first time for everything, but a perjurous whistleblower who basically is perjuring themselves of their own free will, right? The other historical examples of perjury before Congress are people who are called and asked hard questions where, like, they didn't come forth on their own. You know what I mean? Like, Bill Clinton was pulled by Ken Starr. You know what I mean? Like, you were asked a question point blank. David Grush volunteered to come and have questions asked of him.
Yeah.
So he is risking, jail time. He's risking, like, he's got he has a spouse. He said, he's risking family. So again, it's either perjury for no reason that I can see, or aliens are real. To me, it's very crisp and binary. And to me, it's remarkable. So I want to believe, as Fox Mulder said in the X-Files, but he did unfortunately not produce any hard evidence. Yeah. But he did have a lot of speculation. So to answer your original question about interdimensional, this has much less evidence than what you could call the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Now I'll explain. I'll explain why. If we look at the balance of evidence for where could you have non-human intelligence civilizations, we've discovered thousands of planets. Yeah. And we think as much as 20% of them might be human habitable, how we define life, as humans define life. So there is lots of evidence from astronomy that says extraterrestrials probably exist and are real. However, all attempts to find extra dimensions have failed. So, and there are two kinds of extra dimensional, interdimensional. So I always roll my eyes when I hear that term, because I know nobody's understanding it. Everyone's screwing it up, because there's actually two separate concepts. One is the idea of extra dimensions, and the other idea is parallel universes. Those are conflated in popular media, and they are conflated in fiction constantly. It's one of my largest pet peeves. So another dimension is simply another direction in which to move. So imagine we all lived in flatland. We all lived in flatland. We would not know what up and down. We wouldn't have words in our language for that. So that's one possibility. Certainly that there are intelligent civilizations that exist, you could call off axis in some higher dimension, and have the ability to come to our, three-dimensional world from some higher spatial dimensions. One possibility. Another possibility, and again, these two are sloppily just thrown together on a daily basis. I could find hundreds of thousands of Google results that will just sloppily throw these together. Another possibility are there are parallel universes, each with their own copy of all of the dimensions of space. And there could be entirely separate universes, and there are theories in cosmology and quantum mechanics that give us this idea that there's this multiverse out there. However, there's absolutely zero, nada evidence for extra dimensions or parallel universes. And we've been looking for extra dimensions because extra dimensions should have side effects such as extra particles that we could find at our colliders or accelerators, like the Large Hadron Collider. There's absolutely zero, nada evidence for extra dimensions or parallel universes, entirely in the realm of speculation. So why aren't extraterrestrials in that same realm of speculation? The difference is we have found exoplanets. We've discovered thousands of exoplanets when we tried and we looked, instead of finding nothing, like the story of extra dimensions or parallel universes, which, to be fair, would be much, much harder, right? Exoplanets, you design a telescope, you can look for planets like we've been doing for, centuries for planets in our own system. So the discovery of exoplanets, to be fair, is an extrapolation of current technology. So just because we don't have evidence right now doesn't mean extra dimensions and parallel universes don't exist. We just don't have the technology to probe those. So that's why I favor the extraterrestrial hypothesis, because we have evidence for it, but we have to be careful. Why do we have evidence for it? Not because it's somehow better intrinsically than these other crazy ideas. It's just because our technology has allowed us to find more evidence for that hypothesis.
Yeah, that's, I hear that a lot in relation to this topic, where you look for the keys under the street lamp, even though you dropped them a mile away. It's like, if you're looking there, that's what you're going to find. Yeah,
exactly. Same thing with dark matter. Dark matter could be something we're not looking for right now, but we're looking for it using technologies we know. And it's the same thing with these speculative ideas to explain some UFOs as, advanced craft or technology of some kind. Even though they're among these ideas, there is one that's easier, and that is the idea that we have extraterrestrials from a different system. Is still, a very skeptical scientist would say, because again, we still have this taboo, like we were talking about, would say, oh, that's equally as stupid and crazy and bad as extra dimensions and parallel universes. But the difference is we've been looking for extraterrestrial civilizations, and while we have not found them, we have found the foundation that would make them possible, other planets.
Now, one thing I've heard, and please excuse me if I tear this or abuse this in some anti-intellectual way, I don't mean to.
Okay.
But I've heard that, one of the things that dark matter, we find it through the interaction of gravity. And I've heard prior that if we lived in a membrane type universe and there were different membranes sort of slotted next to each other, that gravity might be bleeding over from one universe to the next, and that might be what we're seeing with dark matter. Could you dispel that for us, if that's possible?
I can't dispel that because it might be possible, but the thing is, the question is if that's testable. I don't know if it's a testable hypothesis, but there's definitely, there's something called the Randall-Sundrum model. So one of the proponents of this is Professor Lisa Randall of Harvard. So I think it's a neat idea. And the idea is that dark matter is just ordinary matter, but it's in one of these extra dimensions, which again, I must differentiate from parallel universes, a separate, very speculative, interesting concept. The idea here is there's another direction to move, right? Other than X, Y, Z, length, width, height. There's some fourth dimension. And I'm not talking about time. So if you want to be pedantic, we call it a fifth or higher, but forget time. This is the fourth spatial dimension, a fourth, perpendicular line to the three we can draw in, in three-dimensional Euclidean geometry. So imagine there's some other direction to move that we don't have words for, that we cannot even imagine, but that we can write the mathematics down for. And so the idea here is, if we let's use a flat analogy again. Imagine our three-dimensional universe is 2D flatland, because then we can make an analogy. So imagine our universe, we live in flatland, but our universe is actually has another direction to move that we don't have words for, because we live in flatland, and it's up and down. And what if there's this matter up and down here, and that's producing a gravitational force just like any matter? But we can't see it, because we don't even know there's this other direction to move, this other dimension. And so that is a valid idea for what dark matter could be, but I've never seen anyone make a suggestion of how you test that. So it's an idea, and it could be true, but we do not have any technological ideas for how we would test that hypothesis and make it true or false.
Okay. Another trope that you see trotted out a lot is the wormhole. Some people talk about things popping in and out of wormholes. You see it on Skinwalker Ranch, the show. Travis Taylor says wormhole every episode, and I love the show, but it happens. So if you could explain to us if that's possible, or, I mean, to me, is it like a black hole where if it appeared near a planet, it would suck us in and that would be the end of it, or not?
No, well, there definitely could be some negative effects, but not as dramatic as a black hole. These are two separate things. So yeah, a black hole is not really a hole. It's a star that's collapsed in on itself, and now you have it has what's called an event horizon, where a point of no return, that if you cross that, then you will get crushed at the center. But black holes, we've already known about them for decades. We've discovered them, we've studied them. They're not speculative. They're real. We study them on a daily basis. We even have photographs. Well, not with literal visible light, but the Event Horizon Telescope got RF photographs of black holes at the center of our galaxy and neighboring galaxies. So we've been studying black holes for a while. What differentiates wormholes is they are still in the realm of speculation. That doesn't mean they're not real, because they are predicted by Einstein's theory of general relativity, which has not failed us yet. However, we wouldn't know how to make one and how to keep one open. Would an advanced civilization do so? It's possible, but there would definitely be some very serious technological challenges. If it was real, then it would definitely be a nice way of zipping across the universe, because then you don't need to argue about faster than light, close to light. Now you could just create these gateways that allow instantaneous or near instantaneous transport from one local space-time to some much farther away. And so it's definitely possible. Do we know for sure that it would be practical and that a civilization could build one? We don't know. And there would certainly be some negative side effects. Imagine if on one side of the wormhole, there's the Earth's atmosphere, right? On the other side is, let's say, the vacuum of space. What stops that wormhole from sucking all the air off, like Skinwalker Ranch, for example, threw it into space? So these are some serious questions that I've never seen addressed. Is if wormholes are real, how do you deal with the different conditions at the two mouths? Wouldn't it try to equalize, flow through? So
it's like throwing open a window in an airplane or something, right? Like
exactly, but much worse, right? You have no idea where the hell that is, other side of that wormhole is. And so it's a speculative possibility. I think that maybe in thousands of years, humanity might be able to figure out how to do something like that. And if advanced civilizations exist, they've probably figured it out. If they've been around for millions and billions of years, they've probably figured everything out already that there's left to figure out. And so I do think wormholes are a serious possibility. But I should mention, I don't know if you know this, when preparing for our interview, I was in a movie, a UFO documentary called A Tear in the Sky.
Yeah, actually, how I even became acquainted with your work was through Kevin Day. I had a conversation with Kevin Day, and so I did.
I see. Okay, so then great. So you know about that. So one of the things we found in the movie, at one point we said, it could be a wormhole, but we have to be extremely careful because again, it's a lot more probable that it's a camera glitch or something else mundane. So could it be a wormhole? Well, we don't have evidence of what a wormhole should look like,
Yeah.
right? We could simulate it like they did in the movie Interstellar, but do we really have a simulation of what it would look like on, in night vision at 4 a.m.? You know what I mean? Like we don't have a basis of comparison. So it's very difficult for us to make that conceptual leap. So we compromise by calling it a wormhole-like anomaly. But even that was really imperfect because, again, it's a little bit too wild, still too speculative, because we only caught it on one camera. We have the radiation detection, but again, we don't have enough corroborative evidence to make such a bold claim, because wormhole would be massive discovery, a naturally occurring one just out there, in Earth's atmosphere. And so we didn't have sufficient corroborative evidence to really declare that, oh yeah, it's a wormhole to another space
Yeah.
time.
So I should say, I know you were in the movie. I didn't watch the movie, so that's why I mean, if I had known, I would have probably referenced it in asking the question. I probably should have watched it.
It's called A Tear in the Sky for a reason. We
Yeah.
saw this thing that could be, but again, could it be a wormhole? Maybe, but probably not, because if it was, you were asking, would there be dramatic effects? There most certainly need to be some. I feel like all the claims of wormholes also we've had, in the past and on the TV and stuff. Why isn't it more dramatic, right? It seems to be very, very calm. And so, I mean, one could imagine there's an advanced civilization out there that solved all these issues, and there's some sort of valve-like effect that prevents, air rushing through the wormhole because of pressure differentials, things like that. Or maybe they already have, whoever they are, an airlock type system that makes sure there are no ill effects. I'm skeptical, because it just seems to me like, I feel like there are fewer challenges to overcome in building a nuts and bolts, metallic spacecraft that can. I feel like there are fewer challenges to overcome to create something like that, versus a wormhole has even deeper hurdles for how even a super advanced civilization would hold it open, would make it stable, would prevent negative effects from destroying things in the nearby area.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question I had, and it's interesting mentioning Kevin and also a lot of other folks, the primacy of consciousness in the UAP experience in terms of witnesses and whatnot. I have in my conversations, and I've had a lot of them now, I mean, that seems to, a lot of people think it comes pretty, it's a pretty important element in what goes on. And I know that there's, the quantum physics, the idea that maybe consciousness or an observer somehow causes the collapse of the wave function in terms of like, establishing what's real. So I was hoping that maybe you could give me a little bit of a reality check. If you think that consciousness plays a formative role in this whole thing, and if so, what you think the mechanism might be.
So, I'll anger a lot of UFO enthusiasts out there, including, the director of our movie, Carolyn's very big on consciousness. No,
Yeah.
I'm deeply skeptical of all this consciousness business. I feel like it's a lot of quantum woo, a lot of misunderstanding of what quantum mechanics, quantum physics is, and I feel like that it adds an additional layer that may not be needed. I mean, I could be wrong, and maybe consciousness is integral. I'm really thinking more metallic nuts and bolts. Ships are realistic, is what I was saying. Is there could be aliens out there. They could build ships. I think that's very plausible. It's not at all crazy. But the consciousness thing is where I start to draw the line. And everyone has their line. Of course, I'm into this crazy stuff, right? I'm studying UFOs. I just told you maybe some UFOs could be but this consciousness business, I don't get it. I really don't, because it really, there's no evidence anywhere that I've seen. I've seen no convincing evidence that the human consciousness can affect reality. And of course, then your viewers or listeners will be shouting that they've got all these hundreds of
psi experiments
articles
and
and look, and there's this psychic experiment that proves this and that happens, and it's like, they're not reproducible. It's as simple as they're not reproducible. Where, and you can make the same case, of course, with UFOs, but there's a big difference. With UFOs, we already have one example of intelligent life in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Us, right? We have an example to work off of. And like I said, we also have exoplanet discoveries. There are nuts and bolts hypotheses we can attach. There
Mm-hmm.
is no hypothesis within quantum mechanics that makes sense to me that can explain this whole consciousness business. Like I don't get it. I don't see how something that tied to subatomic physics could have evolved
Mm-hmm.
in the human, how the human brain could have evolved to be able to utilize this. That said, I've had long conversations with Travis Taylor, who from
Mm-hmm.
Skinwalker Ranch,
Yeah.
and I've asked this with of Travis over dinner, and he will point to certain, there are some hints maybe here and there, modest pieces of evidence of this, but I just, even if some of the phenomena somehow tied to consciousness, where I absolutely disagree the most is that it's integral. I think it's still modular in the sense that I can begin studying this with nuts and bolts, and if it turns out that consciousness is important, great, that can come later. But I still think that we can break this problem up and ask specific hypotheses and specific questions and test specific hypotheses without jumping the gun to the craziest stuff that has the least evidence. I feel like we can do this in a modular way. I know Kevin Day disagrees, Carolyn Corey vehemently disagree with me, but I think that I don't want to yet give up on our foundations of the scientific method that have done us so well for decades, for centuries, to give up on the scientific method and say, oh, that's not going to work because consciousness, blah blah blah. Like, I'm not ready to do that.
Yeah.
I think we can use the tools of hard science still to test even these most speculative hypotheses, and one of them is that consciousness, for example, you can call down aliens, right?
Sure.
This
CE5 stuff. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That's where this conscious thing comes in. I'm not opposed to that. We should test it. Even though I'm skeptical, I'm not saying my deep skepticism should not be confused with what all the debunkers of UFOs do, which then don't look at the evidence. Absolutely not. My skepticism doesn't translate into, oh, don't bother testing it. That's not at all what I mean. Sure. I'm skeptical, but I'm all for taking people who do CE5 and saying, okay, you can call down aliens. Great, let's use the scientific method. Do it 100 times, and then do it 100 times again. This time, do it wrong. Basically, plus control data. Okay, now do the wrong type of meditation, and now the aliens won't come. You see what I mean? You got to have control data, got to have reproducibility, and those are the things they're not willing to do as far as I've seen. I would love to meet a CE5 person who's open enough to be disproved, open enough to be like, okay, I'm willing to be tested. If they're willing to be tested under scientific conditions, and my worry is then they'll always say, oh, but the aliens weren't feeling it tonight, it doesn't count this time. I just that's where I start to draw the line.
Yeah, it's interesting. Kevin Day told me a story about a tear in the sky where he feels like that he had at some point had a CE5 kind of moment when you guys were on a rooftop. Does that ring a bell? I mean, to ask this question, I should have watched the movie, but if you can go into that a little bit.
Yes, again, and I'm not downplaying his experience. What I'm saying is, but we were only there a week. And so we don't know if it's reproducible, right? If when I've got the feeling, now, and then we find something, on the camera, but does that happen 10% of the time, 90% of the time, more than chance? So because, of course, we're limited to just 1 week, we're filming this, movie one place, that's not enough to say either way to prove or disprove his personal experience or Carolyn. So I'm not downplaying, Kevin Day, great to meet him. It was great fun with him and Gary and me and filming that. But with 1 week, that's not sufficient data to prove or disprove whether our emotions or consciousness have a reproducible, repeatable effect.
It sounds like almost, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying the same thing that you said with the extra dimensional hypothesis, that you're adding something there that maybe not even necessary if we just approach it from what we already understand.
Exactly. So again, I'm all for, this is why we're having this interview. I'm all for these speculative ideas. I want to see if maybe some tiny fraction of UFOs could legitimately represent non-human craft. There's still stigma saying that out loud. I'm all for testing this. I just I feel like let's test the easier stuff first. And I feel like with nuts and bolts ships and the extraterrestrial hypothesis, we've got the evidence. That doesn't mean consciousness isn't important. Doesn't mean extra dimensions aren't real. Absolutely could be real. You know, string theory predicts there should be plenty of extra dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is, and multiple universes for that matter, both. And so these things could be real. But my point is, let's go with the low-hanging fruit,
Mm-hmm.
and let's start by using the tools of the scientific method we already have in our toolbox, cameras and radiation sensors and infrared and ultraviolet. Let's start with the low-hanging fruit of things we already know how to test before we say, oh, it's this crazy thing that we don't know how to test because it's this wild extra thing that science isn't ready for, humanity isn't ready for. But let's start with the low-hanging fruit and work our way up and see if the increasingly more speculative things, I'm open to them being real, because I could say I'm applying Occam's razor here, but I hate that phrase, Occam's razor.
That's abused a lot.
It is abused because one could make the claim, I've made this claim myself, that recent history of science, especially particle physics, disproves Occam's razor. Because I'm sorry, Earth, air, fire, water, ancient Greeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, is that simpler? Or a periodic table of 100-some elements and quarks and leptons and neutrinos, right, and all this crap. Like, yeah. So the thing is Occam's razor is deeply misabused, because it's not the simplest explanations that tend to be true. History of physics disproves that trivially. Okay, mm-hmm. It's the simplest explanations still consistent with the data. People forget. Yeah. People forget the second half. And so when we're in that, and this is, you asked earlier, why am I interested in UAP? Because it's gotten to the point where the simplest explanations are no longer consistent with the data, with some of the most interesting cases like the 2004 Nimitz encounter and things like that, where you have radar data, you got infrared, you got pilot testimony, which again, eyewitness testimony, we know by itself not good enough. But if the eyewitness testimony is corroborated by sensors that can't hallucinate, I mean, they can have glitches, but then we're getting into the point where what are the odds that the sensor has a glitch at the same time as the eyewitness, and this has happened over and over again?
Yeah, or there's even multiple sensors. So you have different systems, exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's that point where the skeptics still use Occam's razor and say like, but simple explanation, it's a sensor glitch or plane. And I'm like, yeah, but that simple explanation is not consistent with the data. Not if you look at all the data. You cherry pick the one piece of data that's easiest to get rid of. Eyewitness testimony is the easiest one, so you pick on that one. Or I feel like there are too many cases now that have piled up that you cannot use the simplest explanation anymore to explain all the data. You take a mundane or prosaic explanation and take all the facets of the data. And then also you can't do that if you add up all the historical, most credible UFO cases. You add it up and it sums up, I think, in my opinion, and that of many of my fellow scientists, as something interesting and worth exploring.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of stuff that you have to dismiss in order to dismiss this whole topic is, voluminous. And I think that people are disingenuous when they do, because they haven't looked at the data. I mean, that's basically what it often boils down to.
Exactly. It's really easy to dismiss things that don't match your worldview if you refuse to even look at the case, like look at the data. And so if you dismiss all of the data offhand, that's a serious problem. That's not scientists. Now, not everybody does this. There are many famous skeptics, debunkers who do look at the data. Mm-hmm. And that I give a lot more credit to people like that who will at least look. And maybe they'll conclude, okay, there's nothing there, but at least they looked. But the majority of scientists who are deeply skeptical won't even bother to check and see if what are the existing scientific publications on some of the biggest cases.
Yeah. I have one more question, if that's okay. Basically, one of the things that we hear a lot about is that, black projects. And I mean, to some extent, it might be, what we see as UPs might be either black projects, or we're in the process of trying to reverse engineer UFOs, and some of those are also in the sky. In order for that to be true, there would have to be new physics that's been discovered and kept secret. As a publicly facing physicist who works in education, my light stopped, it's okay. How would you feel if you found out that there was a great deal of physics that the government had discovered but kept secret for military or industrial issues? Whether it's 0-point energy or anti-gravitics or those kinds of things, to me, it seems like that is a huge violation of, like, I mean, if you're keeping the fundamental nature of reality from the people who you are supposedly governing, that seems like the ultimate betrayal. But I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I agree. Well, first I have to go back to the new physics. Again, it's not necessarily new physics. It could just be new engineering, because we still haven't learned, for example, how to use Einstein's theory of relativity at a practical level, like a little bit. We got GPS, we got things like that use general relativity. We have not been able to use it for propulsion. And so I think that it's probably new engineering mostly. Definitely also it's probably new physics, like what's dark matter, what's dark energy, right? If there's an advanced civilization out there, they probably figured that out, and there's probably new physics there.
Yeah.
I would be deeply furious, because to me, secrecy, and I understand there's national security and all that, but as a scientist, that's anathema to me, because open science is critical. And I understand sometimes you need secrecy, like there was the Manhattan Project. But I would be, if something's been kept secret for this many decades, yes, I'd be absolutely furious. But I have to say, I'm deeply skeptical that we have any successful black projects. Here's why I'm skeptical. Why did we lose Vietnam? Why did we lose Afghanistan? Why aren't we helping Ukraine with our top secret UFO tech crap that Russia wouldn't be able to track? Like, what are we waiting for? Okay. Yeah. If there really is black projects, which I'm not denying that possibility, I'm just saying it's unlikely. Like, to me, at this point, aliens are more likely than black projects, because we're screwing with our own pilots. Remember the congressional testimony, Ryan Graves, was there David Fravor? Why are they in those seats talking about UFOs? Why aren't they piloting the good shit, right? The Tic Tac and all that. It makes no sense to me. Where are the pilots coming forward saying, yeah, I was the pilot in the Tic Tac, not happening. Or let's say, okay, they're AI controlled, fine, because I can already hear the criticisms in my head. Fine, where's the remote control guy, right? Who's doing or there's the guy who wrote the AI software. Where are the people coming forth under the new UFO legislation, whistleblower protection that already exists, and there's going to be more? Where are they? Yeah. Where are they? Right? This is just simple logic. So if there are, as Grush claims, remember I said earlier, I think there's a possibility Grush is telling the truth. And if he is, most important discovery in human history, period.
Absolutely.
Period. If he is telling the truth. Again, we have to be careful. He's presented no hard evidence, but for good reason. If it is all classified, that's not a cop-out. That's valid. A skeptic will say it's a cop-out. If it's highly classified, that's a valid excuse.
He can't talk about it. I mean, exactly. Or he goes to prison. Yeah.
Exactly. But then the skeptic will say, but he just did talk about it. But he hashed his terms very carefully, and he's going under legal terms like the whistleblower protection. So I'm open to the possibility of Grush being right. And if he is, I think we've had zero success in any reverse engineering. Here's why. Yeah. First, here's the evidence. Why did we get what about, okay, Vietnam was too long ago. Afghanistan, Ukraine. What the hell are we waiting for, right? Yeah. If we have this tech, why aren't we using it to beat the pants off Russia, turn off all their nuclear missiles so they can't start World War III? Why aren't we using this right now? I'll tell you why. If aliens are real, if some have crashed, and if we're reverse engineering, again, all big ifs, because we have no proof, we have no hard evidence. So let's just speculate. Let's say Grush is right. I think we've had zero success, and here's why. We've had zero success because imagine the following. This ties in with your new physics and also new engineering. Take your laptop that you're talking to me right now on. Imagine you give your laptop to let's pick the greatest scientists of the 1890s or, late 9th century. James Clerk Maxwell, Michael Faraday. How long do you think it would take them to figure out how your laptop works? Never.
They don't.
They would
Yeah.
die. They would die of old age before they'd figure it out. After the battery died, and they had no way of plugging in. They'd be like, "Oh shit!" and they would be making even less progress because they don't even have it on anymore. They have no progress.
Yeah.
Albert Einstein, bad example because he's not an experimental physicist. So, Enrico Fermi, pick your favorite experimental scientist. We need to be fair, in terms of gender, race, and inclusivity. Maria Gebhard-Meyer, Marie Curie. How long would it take the most brilliant minds from any country, any race that humanity has ever produced to reverse engineer your laptop that you are typing on right now in, let's say, 1890s, 1950s? It would be hopeless. It would be hopeless.
Yeah.
You know what you would need? You would need a Manhattan-style project, hundreds of scientists, just to figure out the workings of that one laptop. And I still think you'd make almost no progress.
Yeah, I can't imagine in the 1890s people would even be able to conceive of what's making it work.
But so let's not go back to the 1890s. Let's stick to the 1940s. Let's take your laptop and give it to the Manhattan Project. How many decades would it take them to figure it out? So I think if crash retrieval is real, we've made no progress. And the only way to make progress is stop it with the secrecy. And I understand, the problem is if there's advanced tech out there, America wants to be the first to figure it out. I get that. But we're not going to make progress with 5, 10, 20 scientists or however many are allegedly working on it, according to Grush, others, not that much. Yeah. You would need hundreds. You would need thousands of scientists, and you'd need some international cooperation. You have to. Even, with the atomic bomb project, it wasn't 100% US, right? We let our allies in a little bit, like the UK. We didn't trust Stalin, so we didn't tell Russia, but we would tell the UK a bit of what was going on, I'm sure. But we need to trust at least, other democracies. We need to trust our allies. We're not going to make progress if what Grush claims is true, and the US is just hiding this, and only our scientists are looking at it. You could have 10 Albert Einstein studying an alien ship for 50 years, and they would make bupkis progress. What we need is a Manhattan Project size thing, and we need to throw everybody at it. We need to throw our best minds at it if it's real. Again, if it's real. But I've always been skeptical of the crash claims, because if they're so damn advanced, why do they keep crashing? And then I thought to myself, and Grush answered this question very nicely in congressional testimony. We're not talking about gods or angels, supernatural beings. If extraterrestrials are real, probably, fallible flesh and blood entities like you and me. So it's not entirely outside of the realm that you could still have accidents. It's not, it doesn't matter how advanced you are. What if, now I'm just speculating, the teenage alien takes the ship out for a run and crashes on Earth. So there are logical reasons why an occasional, very rare crash is not outside the realm of logic. It's even for an extremely advanced civilization. So I will give Grush the benefit of the doubt on that. But I don't think we made any progress. I feel like we'd be like monkeys with an iPhone. It's just, I really don't think we'd be making any progress unless we're dealing with a civilization that's only, 50, 100 years ahead of us. If it's millions or billions of years, we wouldn't know.
We wouldn't recognize it as technology even. I mean, half the time.
We wouldn't even know how to turn it on.
Exactly.
We wouldn't even know how to turn it off. We wouldn't know the difference between the computer and the engine. We would have no clue where to start. And so I feel like all these crash retrieval programs, if they're real, have all been dead ends. And they've been dead ends because we overclassify everything. We're not allowing enough scientists and engineers to work on it.
Yeah. Which is part of what they're claiming. I mean, some of them are claiming, the people who are coming forward. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, Professor Szydagis.